Hello, welcome to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host today, Mayor Tim Elinski of Cottonwood, and with me is Mr. Mike Mongini, and we're going to be discussing the Riverfront Commons building, also known as Rough Cut building, and as a potential location for City Hall, weighing the pros and cons on that decision. So the Mongini name's very familiar. I'm sure those that have been around have heard that name. Would you like to go in just a little bit of detail on your name and your family background?
Well, I was born and raised in Cottonwood and lived most of my life, early life in Cottonwood. My father immigrated here and was a dairy farmer, and my mother came here after she married my dad. Mm-hmm. Both came from Italy, and we grew up on a farm, and they called the UVX farm in Bridgeport. But this is our home, and all my siblings now have moved back here from different careers, different places, and so we all live here in Cottonwood, except for myself. I'm still in Flagstaff.
Right, right. So they were here at the turn of the century or early 1900s?
He came here actually right. My dad was born in Jerome in 1911, but as an infant he went back to Italy. Oh, and then World War I broke out, and then the northern part of Italy was devastated. And my father made a comment. He said, "That's the richest place in the world was that part of northern Italy, and if it's in the condition it is now, we got to leave." And so they came to Arizona, okay. And that was in the late 20s, okay, and 24 actually, and they came back here and settled here and got the farm in 29, and then the Depression hit. Right. And so they were able to make it because they had a farm.
Yeah, sure.
Food.
Okay. And so now you're an attorney up in Flagstaff.
I am.
Correct? Yep. Okay. And so you've been following the Rough Cut Riverfront Commons concept for a while, and just a bit of background on it. So there was actually an article recently in the Verde Independent, and I was even shocked to learn that, I think back in the 80s, the Cottonwood City Council was discussing the need for a city hall, new city hall, and basically, you know, the city buildings are spread across town, and there's really no central location for a city hall, and this was part of the discussion back in the 80s even, and I've been on council now for about 13 years, and we've always discussed it as well, the need to consolidate services and, you know, vacate some of the properties that we occupy. So what's been your level of involvement historically?
Well, I was actually aware back in the early 80s about a city hall concept, and I call it one of those cans that everybody wants to kick down the road. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not convenient, but the community started growing. They have different downturns that kind of frustrate, you know, the city facilities, you know, or city hall facilities. The facilities they're using now are just by chance the city has grown into them during an economic sadness. I use the word in Old Town. Mm-hmm. How the merchants had left. And so it's convenient for even the post office relocated. So the city was able to pick up these buildings for, you know, little to no money to expand space for the needed offices. Mm-hmm. But they are located in 5 buildings now, and that's in an area now that has vitality. Mm-hmm. And there's a time that you stop kicking the can down the road, and city needs to make a decision to figure out where a future city hall is going to be located.
Mm-hmm. And the city had looked at the Rough Cut building, which is the red brick building there on the corner of 10th and Main Street. And as it turns out, the hospital purchased that building. And I believe the city sort of canned the idea basically of constructing a new city hall. We did some other capital projects and didn't have any capital money left really to do anything with the new city hall. But initially we had looked at that building as a good location for city hall. And now Northern Arizona Healthcare and the city have had some conversations, and it looks like that might be an option again. And, you know, from my perspective at least, I'm curious to hear what you think about this. It seems to me like that would be a good location to move City Hall because it still keeps City Hall within the district of Old Town, but it really does expand that district. And we recently went through an entertainment district proposal, and we've approved that. So now we've expanded the entertainment district from the commercial corridor of Old Town all the way out toward the Safeway intersection there at Main and 89A. So we've designated that all as an entertainment district, and it seems like by relocating City Hall to the Rough Cut building, we could encourage the economic development toward that 10th Street and Main intersection?
I I definitely agree on that. The heart of Old Town would, the city freeing up those 5 buildings for alternate use would be a tremendous positive thing for Old Town. I'm no architect, but I've dealt with construction stuff as a lawyer from most of my career. And those buildings, for example, they're 5 distinct buildings, and they all are painted the same color, a series of colors. And I mean, that's not part of a historic district at all. But but they are identified as municipal buildings. But if they were just in the individual ownership, business operators and stuff for the Old Town, they would all be very unique to the historic nature of the structures, which would add further vitality to your historic district and the entertainment district. I think the rough cut location, I mean, I think it's a preferred location for long term, is distinguished from a short term view. I do remember years ago, and I'm trying to remember who was the city manager. It was pre-Brian Mickelson. They were talking about putting the city hall at the corner of 6th Street, where there used to be a maintenance facility for the City of Cottonwood in '89, and that was like a 4.5, 5 acre site. And in the scheme of things, yeah, it's right centrally located, but it's only for that limited area. It's distinguished from being something significant also for your entertainment district, and Rough Cut provides that. And there's positives and negatives about that site. And I don't know if you want me to kind of explain those positives.
Please do, absolutely.
Well, the positive is it's a 55,000 square foot building. It's 100% masonry, non-combustibles, which is a very, very expensive construction cost. If you said, I'm going to go build one, okay, versus we're out here in the West, we traditionally see, I call it sticks, type construction. And so one, it is built, meaning to last a century. And it also is located next to a large parcel the city owns, which is the ball fields, which is the new sewer treatment plant facility. And so you have some crossover issues dealing with parking. If employees were in there, you can use parking down below. And I think you have I recall there's solar panels down there as part of the sewage treatment plant. You can park underneath the solar panels, and people park in the shade. I mean, you just walk across the irrigation ditch and you're in a facility. The size is intimidating if somebody thinks I need to use every square foot. You really don't need to use every square foot. You just need to use what you need to use, and I think the debate is somewhere between 25 and 30,000 feet to consolidate your current buildings. And I just see the consolidation. And somebody said, when you're going into something new, you're not saving money. And I disagree here. I think you are saving money. I think it's not a wise decision to continue kicking the can down the road. People drive around Cottonwood. Cottonwood's gone through dramatic change about every 10 years. And each time there's a dramatic change, it kind of shocks everybody what the change is. I grew up in a little small town. I don't know if we did not know everybody. It was very, very small, but every 10 years you'd see a dramatic change. And we're going through another one of those dramatic changes. And the facilities that are being used by the city now basically just aren't adequate. And somebody says they are. Well, I beg to differ, because my law practice is in a 15,000 square foot building. And I see the staff we have is nothing compared to the city. And I see how our facility is being used on Saturdays and Sundays, because our conference facilities, which are significant, are being used other times, and so they're being scheduled on a Saturday or a Sunday. So I think that sometimes we kid ourselves that we have adequate facilities, where sometimes we really don't. And we're just making do. And I think we've been making do with these facilities dating back for probably 20 years. Right. In the 90s, I think they started making do, and then you start kicking the can down the road, because, well, we don't want to spend the money. I don't think you have those economics here on the money that's really going to be spent. I think on the positive side, in the city, the hospital is gracious to look at advancing the money for renovation, and they're going to carry a financing transaction for the city. and to be paid back upon the disposition of the 5 buildings.
Right. And certainly the cost associated with relocating City Hall is something that's of concern not just to the council but to the community too. So I know you've come up with a concept that you've tried in the past and has worked very well, and we're going to just take a quick break, and when we get back I'd like to talk about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
There are people who struggle with addiction and homelessness. Sometimes it may feel like there is nothing we can do to help.
But there is. You can make a tax-deductible donation and help those in need transition away from homelessness. When you give someone a handout, you could actually be supporting an addiction.
A better life starts with better health, especially for those living in the streets.
Support solutions, not addictions. You can make a difference. Visit cottonwoodcares.com.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
Yeah, not out here.
Yeah. Okay, welcome back. You're watching Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host today, Mayor Tim Elinski, Mayor of Cottonwood, and with me is Mr. Mike Mongini, and we were discussing weighing the pros and cons of relocating City Hall to the Riverfront Commons rough cut building there on 10th Street and Main. And before we left for break, we were discussing the nut that we'd have to crack essentially to make that move, and the financial burden that's involved. And you came up with a trust, I don't think it's your concept alone, but you came up with a trust concept that would help us in cooperation with Northern Arizona Healthcare move into this facility and be able to finance that through the hospital and through this trust concept. And I was hoping you could take some time to explain that to the listeners, please.
I can. It's basically what they refer to as a dual beneficiary trust. They're, believe it or not, very common, but most people never have seen them. They are in transactions that aren't your traditional buy and sell of a house. Most people would correlate their transactions to the purchase and sale of a house. They get financing from a bank, and they just make payments to the bank, and that's kind of the end of it. Well, in this situation of a trust, the concept is the lands that the city's going to trade with the hospital for payment. They go into the trust. So you'll have 5 buildings, it could be other properties too, go into the trust. And then the commons property goes into the trust. And there's an amount that's due to the hospital for the building. And then there's monies due the hospital for the advancement for the renovation costs. Mm-hmm. And so those numbers then have an interest factor to be paid, and it's like 4%. The contemplated rate is about 4%. And that gets paid back at $10,000 a month. So the city will then be advancing $10,000 a month. And the $10,000 a month goes to pay down what's the city's fault. In concept, if you take that 4% of the amounts that we're talking about, it won't be covering the interest. It'll be close, but it won't be covering the interest. Mm-hmm. Now what happens is, as one of these 5 buildings sell, those monies then come in the trust and start paying down that debt. Mm-hmm. So as all these 5 buildings sell, they will somewhat be paying down most of the debt. Then it goes for a period of 10 years, and at the end of 10 years, I don't think the amount is very significant that it remains to be paid. Mm-hmm. I would think in the scheme of things, once these 5 properties sell, that the city will then probably just want to just refinance through the typical bond refinancing they do and just pay off the hospital, because at that time the interest rates probably are be competitive for the city just do on their own and separate the trust. But during that period of time when it's in the trust, there's not like anything can happen to any of the properties, because they're designated to be sold and proceeds used to pay down the the Northern Arizona Health Care. And I would say that would be the preferred transaction for multiple reasons. As one is the city can stay in possession of the current buildings until after the new buildings are built. And the city knows when the renovations are done, they can move in and transition in at a reasonable pace to get into them. And so that is not something I see. I've been involved in some transaction recently, and I can see people don't see them, those type of trusts being used unless you're on a different level. I mean, it's not uncommon. You call title companies, ask them about their trust department. Oh, absolutely, we have one. Okay. So they're common with regard to title companies' trust departments. Right. Okay. The average Joe probably never saw one of those trusts, but it's a concept. You have a trust, you know, say First American or Pioneer or Yavapai Title. And I prefer to use Yavapai local. Right. Title company, they hold it in trust. They administer it locally, and everything's turned over to them. They're doing it as part of a municipal trust, meaning the properties are city properties. And as they're sold, the money's paid down, comes into the trust disperses it to the hospital, pay back the obligation. So there's no expensive issuing bonds or anything like that, or underwriting or any of that. Okay. And I think the hospitals and Northern Arizona Healthcare is being very cooperative to do this. Right.
So again, the hospital would front the money, not just for the property, of course, but also the tenant improvements that would need to be done in there, and any furnishings or fixtures, any equipment that we need to put in there. Right.
Well, the furnishings, I don't think they're going to front the furniture and stuff. I think you'll have some cabinetry and stuff, counters built, but when you start dealing with desks, conference tables, stuff like that, that's not part of it, because that could be, furniture can be very expensive. Right.
Of course, my preference would be you take your desk with you.
Right. I think it's a good idea, but I've seen some of your furniture. It's the same thing. They kind of kick the can down the road. Some of the stuff is so dated. Some of the stuff got to be 30 years old.
Right. Easily. Yeah.
So
I think conservatively, when we looked at it, when city staff has looked at it, it seems like the figure that would be left at the end of the 10-year term would be about conservatively $1.5 million. Dollars left, and we're not looking at just selling the 5 properties in Old Town, but we're looking at the council's looked at all city-owned property, and we've made a list of all the property that we plan to sell, and our valuation is somewhere around $2.9 million for all the property that we own. So there's several parcels that we'd be selling off.
That makes it better.
Yeah, I think. I guess what would be some of the negatives associated with this trust concept?
Honestly, any transaction has any degree of risk, any degree. The trust concept makes it the best for both buyer and seller. One, you don't have a trustee sale, for example. You don't go out courthouse steps and auction off a property. Right. Which oftentimes that hurts the seller. Likewise, it embarrasses the buyer. And the reason is you're having an auction on the courthouse steps. Trust is just a notice, and it basically just, you have a forfeiture, and it still stays in trust until they decide what to do with it. Meaning decide the person, the beneficiary who's entitled to make the decisions. And oftentimes, if there is a problem, they get worked out within the trust agreement again. Right. A few times I've had it where you've forfeited the position, and the person entitled to it takes possession of the property. Most of the time it's worked out. Okay. Most of the time I say it gets worked out.
And so the city, explain how the city then is able to get the biggest value for the properties.
Well, that's a very good point. A very good point. I would say that the city has to go through their process and have the properties appraised. And when the properties are appraised, they're because the city has to get the fair market value for the assets that go in this computation. So they'll appraise the before and after. The rough cut building is going to be appraised, and so will these 5 buildings. And I think that rough cut or commons building, I think, will appraise for a lot more than people think. The reason is it does have tremendous utility in place today. Just when they go through and say, what's the cost to replace this? That's going to be a very high number. It is somewhat of a white elephant, and there's no secret. It's been sitting there for a while, somewhat of a white elephant. but everything that's put in there was very high quality. There was nothing put in there not of the top quality in construction trades. So I would say that the negative is if these properties don't sell, but I think on the 5 building side, they're in the right location to get a premium, meaning much greater than the appraised values, being disposed of one at a time over a period of maybe 3 years, versus saying, here, we're going to sell them all today. Have an auction, just auction them off. I think there's a lot of participants down in that market already that would step forward and say, oh, by the way, I like to have one of those buildings, and I will pay you this, which would be, I think, 25, maybe even 50% above appraisals, just because they would be receiving with means 20, 30% down, and then finance them in a period less than 10 years. So all the money flows in the trust, goes to the hospital, and the renovations can take place separately. So that person can refinance once they do the renovations to the building on their own.
Got it.
And so the values will appraise much higher once they've done the renovations. But sometimes acquiring a building, doing all the financing, they had banks kind of hedge on that. Versus you've already done the renovations, I just want to refinance my underlying debt.
Got it. Okay. Let's take a quick break again. When we come back, I want to talk about the additional 15 to 20,000 square foot that will be left available that the city won't occupy at Rough Cut. So, thanks. We'll be right back.
There are people who struggle with addiction and homelessness. Sometimes it may feel like there is nothing we can do to help.
But there is. You can make a tax-deductible donation and help those in need transition away from homelessness. When you give someone a handout, you could actually be supporting an addiction.
A better life starts with better health, especially for those living in the streets.
Support solutions, not addictions. You can make a difference. Visit cottonwoodcares.com.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
Welcome back to Inside Cottonwood. I'm Tim Elinski, the mayor of Cottonwood. With me today is Mr. Mike Mongini, down from Flagstaff. Born and bred here in Cottonwood, long family history here. We were discussing the concept of relocating City Hall to the Riverfront Commons building there on 10th and Main. And before we left, we were having a conversation about how much square footage the city occupies. And I think we're doing a space needs assessment at the moment, but we're thinking probably around 25,000 square foot is what the city would occupy of that building. It's a 55,000 square foot building, so there could be 20,000 to 15,000 square foot that is still available. And what would be the best use for that space under this trust concept? 'Cause I understand there's some limitations on how we can use that space and who we can partner with to make sure that this trust concept still works.
Well, when it's in trust, the possessory right belongs to the city. I mean, the city has a right to do whatever they want with the 55,000 square foot building. The only obligation they have is basically just to make payments to satisfy the $10,000 a month. For 10 years. I mean, that's pretty much what they got to do. Okay. And if the properties don't sell, then they got to pay the amount at the end of 10 years. But the space inside, if you're using 25,000, I mean, you roughly have 30. There was a committee of builders, realtors that Doug Bartosh had asked to sit there and have a discussion, and I was able to participate with him. And so we went out, I use the word a field trip, to go look at the structure. And the concept at the time of the discussion is just to develop both first floor and second floor, which would give the 25 to 30,000 feet towards the entrance. And the rest of it, use the word towards the back or side of the building, the west side or the east side of the building, would be left vacant. Now vacant depending on where the departments are, it would be vacant for a period of time or used by, I use the word truly nonprofits, ones that probably need assistance to have space within the city, but can't really afford it. That could be used by them. They can maybe get a grant for TIs or whatever else. But the area would be principally used for expanding as the city grows, because every time the city grows, we need 2,000 more feet. And the idea is to just add on to a building. Well, that addition costs a lot more per square foot than the whole per square foot. And here it'd be very easy to add on to any additions for any of the departments, both on the second floor and the bottom floor, because you have such capacity. The other thing, the building itself on the entrance to Old Town has a sense of awe, positive look to the building. As a city hall, it honestly looks like a municipal building or a government building because of the way it's built. I mean, it looks sturdy, like it's going to be there for 100 years. But that other area would be something that, I would say, something that can, for other city uses that they may have. I know there's discussions of relocating the courts there, but it would be some other uses the city has.
Right. Okay.
And or these nonprofits that oftentimes get started in a community, and they need some space to serve the function they have.
Right.
But oftentimes they have the money to do the tenant improvements.
I certainly think there's a lot of room for to offer assistance to the nonprofits. I know we have quite a lot in the area, and the concept of relocating the municipal court too, I think, is a good way to go. We've had discussions about co-locating courts, similar to what Clarkdale has done recently with the Justice Court. So there could be, I think, a lot of efficiencies to be had there in co-locating courts at that location. Seems like there'd be plenty of space for that. And again, I just see a lot of room for economic development in not just the Old Town area, but throughout the city, where we have other properties that we've just been setting on and doing nothing with, as well as greater efficiencies to be had. Relocating everything centrally be much simpler for the end user, for the customer, for the citizen to access city government. So I see many benefits. One negative, you asked me about some negatives. There are a couple of negatives that I failed to mention, but I don't see them being a driving force, because this will solve some of the negatives that are associated with the property. One is the access into it and the parking associated with the building seems to have some issues. I mean, you have an alignment to go to Dead Horse Park that doesn't match up with the corresponding street. I think it's 10th Street. Right. They just don't match. I mean, they're not perpendicular. That needs to be dealt with in some fashion, and that's going to cost the city some money to do so, which means they're going to have to probably buy some of this property to solve that problem. And so you already end up with the property to solve the problem. And the parking side of it is the negative of the building. I call it the white elephant negative, but it's not, because the city's right next door, with their facilities, and you can park down around underneath the solar panels of the treatment plant. Right. So those are I call it the negatives I see in the structure and the white elephant creature. Developed as something other than a city hall is positive, but you may be putting something down there that probably may not fit. But you do it just because you want to get rid of a white elephant. Right. But the city hall down there would fit. It's not that big of a distraction from where they're currently located, other than they free up some historic buildings for use in your historic neighborhood. Right. Well, we've come to the end. I just want to say thanks very much for sharing your thoughts on this concept with us, and really appreciate you helping us out. You've been a tremendous resource for me and for the city to learn more about this dual beneficiary trust concept, and just the overall support that you've given us. I appreciate it. You're welcome. And unfortunately, we couldn't have anyone from Northern Arizona Healthcare. Tom Inman was out on holiday, so we couldn't have him in today. But this is really the start of what's going to be hopefully a robust community conversation as we discuss again the pros and cons of relocating City Hall. So thanks for your perspective. You're welcome. Okay. And that ends Inside Cottonwood today. Thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.